Pulp by Common People here on Desert Islands. In the middle of that set, we had some REM, Man on the Moon, and at the top of that set, Stevie Wonder, Love's in Need of Love Today. Ain't that the truth? So, if you're just tuning in here on Desert Islands, this is the show where I make mixtapes based on my guests' 10 records they bring to a desert island, and I'm making one for Dr. Simon Calder today. So I am juggling a few things. We're going to set up a live chat. So follow us right now. You can hang out with us. So we're going to have more mixtape coming up. We got some Radiohead. We got some Bowie. We got some Lou Reed. And we even have a track from Simon's upcoming album. So stick around for this. But first we have this. KFAI is proud to present the Zipper Internet Momentum. Okay, so I figure since we kind of advertise it at the top of the hour, it's best to actually bring you live on the top of the hour.
Okay, cool. That sounds good.
But yeah, we are hanging out. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Just because I mean when I saw you were writing a book, I felt like, oh, like who supports the supporters? I mean, you've had so many people on the show. Yeah, I've been on your show, and I've been looking to have an excuse to have you on the show for a while. So I'm so glad we could actually do this.
Likewise, and you found a good excuse.
Yeah, you have like the perfect form of things going on. So not only do you have this record, which I hope to talk about soon, just because after this set, it's usually when we get into the local music. I was hoping to spin a cut off that record. I do want to talk about the book, though.
They're very related.
Yeah. So I think that's going to be like the first break coming up is the record, and then I'd hope to segue into the album. But this is just the on-air talk breaks, just because there's a whole segment that just watches these videos, but there's also a thing where people don't even watch the video, they just listen to the interview. So I want to make sure we talk about that on the air, but we can also let the conversation wander, but also get into the nitty gritty on this segment too as well. So I snuck in some Lou Reed because apparently yesterday was the 50th anniversary of this record.
Which Lou Reed song is that?
Satellite of Love off of Transform.
Produced by Bowie.
Yeah, I figured that it's just like, oh, this era kind of always reminded me of like Ziggy Stardust era Bowie, and it's probably because Bowie had a lot of influence on it.
Bowie's but also singing on this song.
Oh yeah. Also, I think Lou Reed was trying to be Bowie a little bit on this.
Well, they kind of love one another. They're friends. They have some kind of very loving connection.
Yeah. So it's so that's where we're at now. I mean, I guess I don't want to do too much surprises, but I also don't want to like cause feedback as well and have the music playing on over the speakers. But so I'm gonna do no surprises. I know that's kind of like an obvious choice. I was considering electioneering, but I think we're all a little sick of that.
That's funny.
But so we're kind of entering that, and of course we can talk about the records that you picked to the cows come home. But if that happens, I just want to make sure we do the promotional stuff for your work.
Thank you.
On the air. So just to cover those bases. But I guess there's a lot of records on here that I feel like we've talked about just at shows for like having fun. And there's definitely a lot of records that were formative in my appreciation.
But which were so for you?
Well, it's hard to say because like Radiohead, I feel like is one of those artists that like, do I pick one of their albums or do I just pick the discography?
Right.
Because it's hard to narrow it down because I think for me, it would depend on what point in my life you met me, because there were periods of time where I'd be like, oh, the Bends, like the Bends is secretly better than OK Computer, and then for years I was just like, no, like OK Computer is way better than the Bends, and then I was I was a Kid A kid for a while,
Well, they're all good,
and they're all great, but like where does the choice get narrowed down for you? Is it a personal anecdote, or do you think it's based on the music that has like influenced you as a creator? How do you narrow down an artist that is so important to so many people?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, when I was making my list of the 10 records, I was imagining if I really was stuck on this desert island, I made sure to put some dance music in there because I thought it's
You
gonna.
gotta put,
If I'm just listening to OK Computer and like Joy
yeah,
Division and a lot of,
yeah,
but at the same time, we're talking about OK Computer. I wanted it to be representative of music that had been meaningful to me throughout my life, and as a
yeah,
teenager when I became a songwriter, and listening to music became a large part of who I was, then
yeah.
OK Computer certainly was my favorite album. I don't really have a
Of
favorite
course,
album anymore, even
it's
whether
so hard.
within Radiohead or in general. But for long periods of my life, if people asked what my favorite band was, I would say Radiohead, and if people asked what my
Me as
favorite
well.
album was, I would say OK Computer. So I thought it would be disingenuous not to take that with me to the desert island.
I mean, it's not just respect for the catalog; it's a tremendous respect for your own journey too, as a person. Of like, and I know nostalgia can get a bad rap, but more science is kind of coming out that like every once in a while, reflecting on your journey and like where you came from is actually healthy. And they were
Oh,
saying like
absolutely, yes.
listening to these records that bring out a sense of nostalgia, or at least like awe or childlike wonder, is a
Yeah,
good thing to do. It's
absolutely. Oh, very much. This and that relates to not just the first book that I have, The Hummingbird Heart, but I've got a number of visual aids. This is
I love it. I
the
love it.
cover of that book, but this is a mock cover of the second book, and it
Nice.
relates very, very much um, to what you were just saying about nostalgia and reflecting on one's
Yeah.
journey. The subtitle to that second book, which should also come out next year, hopefully, is
Oh
10
wow.
Ways of Enriching the Stories That We Tell Ourselves. And the first way in the first chapter is taking ownership of our life stories.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
totally on board. So I wouldn't be abiding by my own ethos
Right.
if I
Right.
tried to. There's nothing after LCD Sound System by LCD Sound System is the most modern. The first LCD Sound System record is the most modern thing
Yeah.
on my list of 10 records that I gave you, and I listen mostly to modern music and mostly to Minneapolis music, and there's no
Yeah.
Minneapolis music on it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I feel like it's hard to choose. Also, I there is a bit of a conundrum too, just because I do remember one of the reasons I stopped writing about music was when I was at City Pages as a music writer. When I started to get more comments from local bands talking about why I wrote about a local band and not them.
Right. Oh,
I
because they're friends
Yes,
or something like that. Yeah.
and there's a whole lot of stuff behind the scenes, because I don't think people know this. Like every time you try to write about a band, it's a pitch, and it's whether or not your editor is saying, yeah, I think our audience would be interested in that. Go for it.
Yeah.
Because
Totally.
I've done interviews with publications where it's just like you sit down with someone, it's a 2 hour conversation, they have the little thing right there, and then you get a message like a week
From the
after.
editor.
yeah, a week after they said the thing would run and saying like, hey, sorry, you know, we're just not running with this. Like either
There
something,
isn't space for it, or
yeah, like
yeah.
either something big happened or um they, you know, like there's always this thing happening. So like the combination of like that being a little hard to explain without sounding uh either like Poindexterish or elitist is tough. And once I realized, like as a creator, like I was just like, well, this feels gross if I'm only doing this job, like it's like this is what it's like, this is how payola starts, you
Mm.
know, where it's just like the relationship of just like, ah, hey, and I'm just like, you know what, I'm not, I think this is going to complicate my relationship with how I listen to music and
Mm.
how I listen to local music. Because when
Mm-hmm.
I listen to a local record, I don't want to hear, oh, this is my friend's music. Like I do want to listen to it as an appreciator. I think with records that I do like, I do kind of become a bit of a cheerleader when they are my friends, and I do actually really like the record. Like when my
Yeah.
friends release a great record, it's just like, oh yeah, and they're my friends. This is so cool. But like I also just don't, you know, I know it's really rich coming from me, a person who makes people like actually put a top 10 list to come on the show, but like I hate ranking art because I
Right.
I hate it.
Well, then,
And the top 10 idea is not like which are the best. It's like it's almost like you know, like you're not saying the list is a numerical order. It's just, you know, a
yeah,
list
I
of,
put mine in order of release, so
yes, I
1970.
really
So,
appreciated that. I really appreciated that.
and I emphasize that so that it clearly wasn't like order of ranking, unless we think that things gradually get better or gradually get worse by the year, which obviously
And
they don't.
I hope things are going to get better. But yeah,
I hope things are going to get better too.
um,
Yeah, realistically, I think if I were to make just a list of my 10 favorite records, at least one close friend of mine would be on it.
yes, yes,
But then I felt into the like I said, the idea of being stuck on the island, and I
yeah,
included things like Stevie Wonder, which it's only very recently
absolutely,
that I've been listening to Stevie Wonder, but the idea that music is a world of its own with a language we all understand that we can all
yes,
sing and dance and clap our hands to. Like I really feel that, and that kind of
yes.
gets to the root of like why I, you know, the owning
Do
the Dr. Calder thing is really like uh, acknowledging my scholarly interests from my PhD kind of it continues into doing Back to the City and paying attention to music because I
yes,
think music
yeah,
is significant. I have a scholarly interest in music because I
of
think
course,
it's
of course.
important
And I
for
almost think
humans.
like it's you know, for me, I get weird about like, oh, I'm trying to be impartial. But
I'm not
it's
trying to be
also,
impartial. We're humans.
yeah, yeah, like yeah. Oh, of course, yeah. It's impossible, and it's okay to have preferences. But I almost think like you could have an entire creative exercise of just local desert islands. Speaking of
Totally.
that, we are
You got a
about to
show to run.
go. David Bowie, 5 years off of the rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust, the Spiders from Mars. We also, at the top of that set, heard some Lou Reed of Transformer. Speaking of Bowie, produced that record. That record turned 50 yesterday, apparently. I did not know that. So I had to kind of slide that into the rotation as well. And then No Surprises by Radiohead in the middle of that set. So if you are paying attention to our off mic conversation, I'm actually hanging out with Dr. Simon Calder right now, and we were talking about local music. So let's talk about some things happening in Minneapolis, where we are broadcasting live this weekend and beyond, starting with tonight. So Molly Mayer is going to continue her second Wednesdays, every second Wednesday at the White Squirrel. Molly Mayer and her Disbelievers are going to take the stage. Thursday, tomorrow night, Human, Wishwash, and Curve at Mortimer's. Friday, whew, there's a lot going on this weekend. There's a lot going on this weekend in general. I'm not going to have time to list it all. So let's get into Friday. Afro Geode and the Gemstones, Big Salt and Charm are going to be at the Mission Room and the Hook and Ladder tomorrow night. We also have Tragic Hands at the Coffee Shop Northeast featuring the Tender Years. Mother Banjo and Jasper Lee Peck are going to be at the Astor on Friday night. And then Goat Roper and Hema also returning to the stage. The Union Suits are back. And that's at Palmer's all on Friday. Saturday, Satujiwa Collective. This features Tasha Barron, Liz Draper, Maha Rando Viliyaha, and Ryan Billing, Munir Kahar. This is a stacked group of musicians. They're going to be performing at the House of Balls to live animation on Saturday. And this is a fundraising event for Indonesian Arts Collective. So check that out at House of Balls. Also Saturday, Floodwater Angel, Murph, Lunar Moth, Magic Flavor Station at Amsterdam. And then Twin Citizen, Phantom Fields, Low Keys Folly, and Rat Castle Jazz Ensemble at Mortimer's. Then Sunday, Annie and the Bang Bang with the Paperbacks at Ice House. Looking ahead, Ice Climber is going to continue their residency this month at Ice House every Tuesday. So if you think I missed something or you just want to hear me mispronounce your band name on the air, email it to desertislandskfai@gmail.com. I try to curate this segment based on everything you send me, but now I'm getting so many emails that I am just going to do my best to be timely with it and catch the things that are happening in 1 week snapshot. So please keep sending me things. I will check social media, but desertislandskfai@gmail.com is like the surefire way to get a hold of me. Okay, we were talking about the local community, but I don't think we can talk about local music in this community without mentioning my next guest. I've been making a mixtape based on Simon Calder's 10 records Simon would bring to a desert island. And Simon is not only the host of Back to the City, a long-running program that has supported local music and regional music. Simon also is a creative and a diligent one at that. Not only have you have a few books on the back burner. I was hoping to talk about one of them, but in our off-mic conversation, you enlightened me that you were working on another as well. But not only that, on top of that, you have managed to come up with a record this year.
I wasn't planning to do that.
I don't know how. I don't know how you do it, but I'm glad you are doing it. So, Simon, welcome to Desert Islands. Thank you for joining
Thank
us.
you, Doc.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, the timing of these things, I have so many questions about the work you've been doing as far as your writing and as far as your musical performing, but also like during the pandemic, I would watch you do these videos talking about the creative process and your journey through the creative process and how that eventually is it's metaphorical for your life journey and not just yours, but I mean just everyone's. I have so many questions on a lot of the work you've been putting out because I think it's been very provocative in a good way on my end. But we're going to have to get to that later because I think we should start talking about this record that you produced. This is like hot off the presses, so to speak. And so this is recently mastered, and it's not currently out yet. And I don't want to step on the toes of your book, but is there a release date you feel comfortable telling the listeners about for what we're about to hear? Or is this still kind of a little close to the vest?
Thank you. I didn't mind treading on my own toes.
Perfect. That's why we're here.
So yeah, the record we're adding. We're going to play a track from it. I
Yes,
believe
we
in
are.
a bit.
Yes, we are.
So that track is done. Obviously, that's all mastered.
Yeah.
A few of the tracks are mastered. We're adding a little bit more instrumentation to I think 3 of them.
Sure. Yeah.
Tristan, who used to play drums in my band Infinities,
Oh, right.
is adding some bass and some cello and a further guitar part to some of the tracks. So that's all going to be done, and he's mastering the record too. So that will all be done this month. The record is called Hum, and the book that it relates to is called Her Hummingbird Heart, and it really is kind of like a they're siblings. It's
I
like
was,
it's
yeah, is this a companion piece was my next question. So
yeah,
thank you.
it's an extension. It can kind of continues the exploration of the role that music plays
Mhm.
in wellness, and we already kind of brought up the exploration of the creative process, and
Yeah.
off mic we were talking about integrating different aspects of one life, and we
Yeah.
in the context of talking about OK Computer being a favorite
Yeah.
record when we were teenagers, and so I put that. I thought it would be disingenuous not to include that on the list. All of
Of
that
course. Of course.
is I bring all of that up because both the book and the record are kind of parallel explorations uh, of the well-lived life
Yeah.
broadly, the
Yeah.
experiments in ethics. And so your question about the release of the record, I think, at least initially, I'm going to have the record be available to people who want to sign up to my email list, which is
Sure. Yeah.
primarily for the books. There'll be e-courses as well that invite people to engage in this kind of exploration of creative living more practically. So rather
Mm.
than just reading about it or listening to songs that relate to it, but to engage in it a bit more practically. And so at least initially, before the record is released, probably in a normal fashion, early 2023, the songs will be available to people who want to sign up to my email list.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, why don't we hear one of those songs here on KFAI? And if you're just knowing us, I know it's a new hour here on 90.3 Fresh Air Community Radio in Minneapolis. This is Desert Islands. My guest today is Dr. Simon Calder. We've been talking about Simon's new album, so why don't we just listen to Simon's new album, shall we?
Recognize that sound?
There we go. There we go. So, who did you work with this record? Who were you recording
This
with?
this is so it was an interesting. There's so much synchronicity involved as the Artist's Way, which was a book that I was reading when I was making those videos in England.
Yeah.
Would suggest would happen when one commits to creativity. But
Yes.
my friend Tyler, who was in Space Cats and Nice Beaches, do you
Yes.
remember those bands?
Yes.
He didn't know that I had the Back to the City show, and then he he heard Bathtub Sig, and
Yeah.
then he looked up Bathtub Sig online and found a video of Bathtub Sig, like a Back to the City live in studio session with interview. And he was like, "Oh, that's Simon."
Yeah.
So then he reached out to me to say, "Oh, that's cool that you do that. Oh, and by the way, I've got a new home studio set up, and
Wow.
do you have any new music?" And in the meantime, I had new music for the first time in 2 years. I hadn't picked up a
Yeah.
guitar in just slightly less than 2 years, and then I had done to finish the process of working on the book,
Yeah.
because Sarah Morris, who is the case study on creative living in the book, she does this songwriting challenge thing. Similar, you've done something like this too, haven't you?
Yeah.
And so as I was near the end of working on the book, I thought she posted about the new summer round of the songwriting challenge.
Right.
And so I thought it would be silly for me not to engage in it, because I'm
Of course.
focusing on her creative practices as let's put myself in this experiment a bit more. And
Well, yeah.
so then the 10 songs on the record are the 10 songs that I wrote in 10 weeks in response to prompts. But also, there are 10 components to Wholehearted Living, according to Brene Brown in The Gifts of Imperfection, which was the book that inspired Sarah Morris to join that songwriting challenge in the first place.
I'm glad you brought that, because one, Sarah Morris is also a friend of the show, but also I was curious watching you talk about wellness and creativity, and just both fostering wellness and creativity in your own journey, because I always admire creatives who it's not just about the appearances. There's actual praxis, and I loved watching you do these series, because there was clearly there is actual praxis to these things, and I love when creatives actually do that. So I was really hoping to get into, who were you reading during this time, like, because it seemed like it was coming from a genuine place of curiosity, yes, because we were in strange times, and it's just like, well, what do we do? What do we do in this environment? Here we go. But it also seemed like there was some kindling there, some inspiration of,
Yeah.
and who was in your life at that time, either friend or uh, just someone you were reading,
Yeah,
that kind of
exactly.
was kickstarting this?
Well, the subtitle to the book, Her Hummingbird Heart, is Harnessing Creativity with Sarah Morris,
Yeah,
Julia Cameron, Elizabeth Gilbert, Anne Lamott, and Brene Brown.
yeah,
lots of
wow.
lots of small subtitle at the bottom, just there. And so that answers the question in a nutshell. I was reading The Artist's Way. I was doing the Artist's Way course,
I've heard wonderful things about that book. Yeah.
and I was recommended that by Andrea Swenson. So
Wow.
I'm kind of, this could be a long anecdote, which is very relevant to the genesis of the book, but also the meaning of the book. And I'm conscious that are there other songs playing after this? Are we gonna have
Yeah,
to?
so Maddie Thighs, or Thies, Maddie, I apologize if I've only read your surname, but this is a new single by
Ooh.
Maddie, postcard collection. And according to the literature Maddie sent me, this was a part of the Cedar Commissions.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
this will be another new work for 2023. I think they're about thinking about releasing it, and then after this, we're gonna have some new Taylor James Donsky, some Goat Roper, Phoenix Dion, and then the rest of your Desert Island.
Cool. So
Um,
it's safe to launch into an anecdote.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Okay. But prior to the pandemic, I was planning to. So the videos that you were talking about me
Yeah,
making, a significant thing about them was that I was in England, which,
of course.
I've lived. I am English, but obviously I've lived in Minneapolis
Yeah,
since 2011, and I moved here to teach at the university. So very quick bit of backstory and why Doctor Calder. Like, I do have a PhD in literature, but I finished it just as the economic crisis was affecting higher education,
yeah,
particularly in England, because the coalition government, we had New Labour, and then just as I was finishing, conservative-led coalition government came in, and they completely transformed how the arts and humanities were funded, and there were very few jobs. So I wound up teaching as an adjunct in communication studies as opposed to literature, and about a year and a half into my time in Minneapolis, I started at last exploring the music scene, and then I was like, oh, I don't need to be applying to get a tenure track position. I like having the freedom, the spare time, and as an adjunct, just enough money to like, it's not a lot of money for adjunct lecturers, but just enough money to be able to explore the music scene. So then I did that more and more, and that led to the band where Tristan, who mastered the record, was the drummer, and that also led to the Back to the City show. And then eventually, I was spending money on Back to the City, especially when we were doing in studio live performances. I'd have to go and get all of that equipment. So I took on a job at Common Roots to
Right.
to fund, but just to avoid having to monetize Back to the City because I like doing
Right.
it fun. And so the one morning, and then the adjunct position that I'd had for a decade, adjunct positions semester by semester, they either do or they don't need you for
Yeah.
the next semester. So there's no job
Yeah.
security. So I was surprised to have had that position all that time. Right before the pandemic, by coincidence, that was when they didn't need me or as many people to be teaching that particular class
Right.
the next semester. And I thought that's okay because I feel like reviving writing. You know, I
Yeah.
wrote my PhD, which is here on my bookshelf, um, back in 2010, and then I hadn't engaged in a writing project since then. Just not I'd written songs, but I hadn't written like a book length project, and I
Right.
wanted to.
Right.
And so I thought I won't look immediately for another higher education job. I will just try and take on more shifts at Common Roots, and I'll just try and be frugal. My parents had barely seen me for a decade. Because when they did come to the Twin Cities in spring break, they thought because it was spring break that it would be sunny, and it wasn't. And not they weren't joking. They said we don't want to come here again. so, they'd never experienced that degree of snow and ice, anything close to it, and they thought that they were going to have a nice spring experience.
No. No.
So,
Sorry.
yeah, they wanted me to visit them, and so I was planning for 2 months after the end of my teaching to get in the habit of writing whilst visiting my parents, and then stay in
Yeah.
that habit, come back, take more shifts on at Common Roots, and just be really frugal and just get a book done. And I planned to do it a lot quicker because I thought time was of the essence. I would run out of money if I was trying to
Yeah.
write a book and
Yeah.
just taking on a few more shifts at the cafe. But right before the pandemic hit, I was working at Common Roots one morning, and Andrea Swenson came in.
Yeah.
And Andrea Swenson, and obviously writes,
Ooh,
and
let's bring this back on air, actually.
cool.
So that was new Goat Roper. We also had Maddie Thies in the middle of that set, postcard collection, and then we had new music from. So this is this under your name or your
That's a very
band?
good question. So the record on the front, on the cover of the record, those who can see the video, this is the cover of the record, and it says Dr. Simon R. Calder as Cephas.
Yeah.
But as I said, the record will at least initially only be available to people who subscribe to
Sure.
the list. So Simon Calder is fine. Cephas is fine.
Fine. Okay.
Dr.
Well,
Simon R. Calder, because it relates to the book.
right, and so I basically was trying to get to the bottom of and by the way, here on Desert Islands, I'm making a mixtape for Dr. Simon Calder. And I was trying to get to the bottom of like the chicken or the egg, which came first, the album or the book. And you were telling us this wonderful story about the journey you got here, uh, taking different jobs, living frugally just to finish this book. And so now at the point of this story, you encountered Andrea Swenson, who last time I unfortunately talked with Andrea, we were discussing how sad we are about Mimi Parker's passing, because she wrote an outstanding piece, not just for Pitchfork, but if you subscribe to her newsletter, an amazing piece. She's an excellent writer. And you, while writing this book, had a chance encounter with Andrea Swenson. And I think that's where we left off on this story off mic.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in the prelude, please watch the video with us. We're hanging out. But now we are at the point where the point of inspiration, in chance encounter with Andrea Swenson.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm at the counter working at
Yeah.
Common Roots at the counter, and Andrea comes in one morning, and Andrea and I are friends, and we know one another because like you as well, we interview local musicians,
Yeah.
and I think Andrea was aware that I also had a full-time job teaching at the university, but was
Yes.
unaware that I also was a barista at Common Roots. So,
Yeah.
so, so Andrew is there to order breakfast, and I mentioned that because this is right before the pandemic, and it's
Yeah.
shortly before my planned 2 month, which ended up being 18 months because of
Okay.
the pandemic,
Wow.
visit to England.
Yeah.
So I explained that I'm about to uh, go to England. I have at that stage I just have the intention to write a book, and I haven't decided
Yeah.
exactly what it's going to be, but I
Yeah.
have that commitment. So I share that with Andrea because we're friends, and I also shared that my particular university job is about to end and that I have this
Yeah.
intention to shift into writing. And as a writer, Andrea recommends a book to me, not just a book, but a course, The Artist Way.
Yeah.
So I
I've heard
was,
wonderful things about this. Yeah.
yeah. So I bought that book that day, and then that was uh, maybe 2 or 3 days later, suddenly the
Yeah.
pandemic is there. I end up going back to England 2 months earlier because international flights are being cancelled. My health insurance
Right.
was tied to the university position, adjunct
Of
position that was
course.
ending. So I
Yeah.
was, and with international flights being cancelled, I was at risk of suddenly in this unprecedented time being stuck
Yes.
without a job if Common Roots stopped.
Oh,
The
yeah.
barista position
Serving in the
also went
pandemic. Yeah.
without health insurance for the first time uh, in my life.
Yeah.
So I went back to England, did the artist way, was randomly stuck in this with my parents who I'd barely seen for a decade without a job. It was so I'm so grateful that happened. Obviously, um, I'm I was extremely lucky
Yeah.
with my experience of the pandemic in that respect. And so, yeah, on the back of doing the Artist Way course, I was looking for more books on creativity.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Gilbert, author of Eat, Pray, Love, and Big Magic, those who can see just above me on the bookshelf just there, were uh, was quoted on the back and the front cover of The Artist's Way. So
Yeah.
on the back of doing the Artist's Way course, I read Big Magic as well. And then I was realizing that the kind of perspective on creativity, harnessing creativity, what creativity is,
Yeah.
there was so much overlap with my PhD, which I
Yes.
had done nothing with really for a decade. So then I was beginning to explore those connections and think, can I return to those ideas in a non-scholarly context and write something in the vein of the Artist's Way or Big Magic?
Yes.
And
Yes.
then I brought back to the city back from my cottage that I was stuck in England. And the first person that I interviewed in that format of the Back to the City show was Sarah Morris. And I
Wow.
asked her a question just related to her newest record, which was Between Here and There, about trust and self-trust. And my question was definitely informed by Big Magic, because the final
Yeah.
section of Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert is called Trust, and it's a key part of creative living for Elizabeth Gilbert. But it was also informed by Sarah's music. Like, I felt like
Yes.
trust was an important
Yeah.
theme in that record. And so I asked her what she felt about the relationship between trust and self-trust, and she paused and she said, well, two books that have meant a lot to me are The Artist's Way and Big Magic.
The amount of synchronicities in this journey are astounding because
Right.
Sarah Morris was also the catalyst for this record.
Yes.
And
Yeah. Well,
so having Sarah and Andrea Swenson as part of like these catalysts for not only a record and a book is fascinating. And you mentioned Big Magic. Some people who are magical thinkers like to think that synchronicities are a sign that you're on the right path. And
yeah.
in all this uncertainty and pandemic, it sounds like you were getting some signs that, oh, I think I'm in the right direction.
I experience lots of synchronicity, and the the subtitle to The Artist's Way, importantly, is a spiritual path to higher creativity, and
Yeah.
and Julia Cameron, the author of that very popular book, talks about good orderly direction or flow. Good orderly direction is an acronym for God. So she talks about God, and
Wow.
it's a spiritual path to
Wow.
higher creativity. And she really like very explicitly says that when you do, we're all creative, we all
Yeah.
experience blocks to creativity, and what will happen, whether you believe it or not, whatever your worldview is, what will happen in practice when you remove the blocks is you'll experience synchronicity,
Yeah.
you'll experience God, aka good orderly direction or flow. You'll get in a flow state,
A flow state.
and
Yeah.
and uh, and she says you can call it whatever you want, but that will happen.
It is there. It's absolutely there.
And in the absence of Minneapolis musicians, when I was stuck in England with no one to, and there was a much harsher lockdown in England, and my
Of course.
parents, who I was visited, who lived nowhere near any other like friends of mine, so I was just
Sure.
with my parents, and they are creative, and they are very, very, very secular, and they're atheists. So I was doing this harnessing the spiritual path to higher creativity course and experiencing loads of synchronicity, and this is like reinforcing my spiritual practices, meditation,
Yes.
and the
Yeah.
like, and uh, and then I thought, what ideal candidate? I did like Back to the City style interviews with my parents because they were the only people around,
Right.
and they are
Right.
very arty, but they're also like very anti spirituality.
Yeah. It's not their.
And
It's not their thing.
so I was quizzing them. I was quoting things from The Artist's Way, and it would recommend in The Artist's Way. It recommends things like gardening, doing things with your hands,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then ideas will percolate. And so I would quote that to my parents. So my mum would say, like, it's when she goes on her morning walks that she has creative
Oh,
ideas. And
absolutely.
so they would be agreeing with all of this. And
Yeah.
then I would, at the end of each interview with both of them, I said, okay, you've been agreeing with each of these things. It aligns with your experience. And what
Yes.
she says at the beginning is we're doing spiritual chiropractic. We are we are
Yeah.
removing the
Yeah.
blocks so that you can experience good orderly direction or God, the flow.
In your own way,
Um,
yeah,
and
whether
then
you view that as such or not.
and she's saying like we're in a spiritual sea of like we're fish in this spiritual sea, and it's like helping you to, so I was quoting that, which is at the beginning, and I said that encapsulates what she thinks is really happening with creativity. What do you think about
Sure.
that, Dad? And he was like, if you began by quoting that, I would say,
I'd be out.
yeah, exactly, can we talk about something else, please? So,
What, speaking of talking about something else, what, because I love the journey up to this point, what would you say is at the heart of your book? I know that's really hard to do, but like we're in an audio medium, and
yeah,
could you quickly give an elevator pitch for the message at the heart of your book? Because I feel like these
yes,
wonderfully tie in, but I do want to make sure we actually talk about your
totally.
journey.
Totally, yeah, yeah. So the overlap with the artist way is
Yeah,
that we are all creative, and
yeah,
yes, there are exercises that we can do that will remove blocks to creativity. That's the thesis
sure.
in the artist way. That's the thesis in Her Hummingbird Heart as well. The e-courses that I've been creating go beyond the book, leading people who want to go on that particular journey to into harnessing their creativity. A difference, though, between the artist's way and Brene Brown as well, which were the books that influenced Sarah.
Yeah,
The Gifts of Perfection by Brene Brown
yeah,
was another book that influenced Sarah Morris to have her creative practices. The difference between Brene Brown and Julia Cameron on the one hand, and my book, Her Hummingbird Heart, really actually has to do with the role of spirituality. Brene Brown, as another, like me, as an academic,
yeah,
researches shame and wholehearted living,
yeah,
and against her like intellectual kind of assumptions and way of being. She concludes that things like intuition and having a spiritual life are core to wholehearted living. Now, like I said, I have spiritual practices, and I would call myself a spiritual person. I'm not sure how
Yeah.
helpful it is to call people spiritual people. If all of life is spiritual, like everyone's,
Yeah.
it's. But I would not have and wound up have experiencing the synchronicities and so on that I do through being as invested to creativity in the path that I'm on. Had I been told by an academic that I needed to be spiritual
Yeah.
to be able to be
Absolutely.
creative, whereas my actual journey was just following my passion and curiosity about what creative people are doing. That's why I've conducted many hundreds of long form
Yeah.
interviews with local artists because
Yeah.
I'm intrigued about creativity, and I've wound up having a very active spiritual life through the
Right.
medium of just committing to creativity.
Oh, I can
So
imagine. I can imagine.
so yeah, the book kind of does explore um, really how committing to creativity, which we can all do, leads to wholehearted living, and really kind of caused me at least to stumble upon through experiencing an immense amount of synchronicities. Like,
Yeah.
okay, my
Yeah.
worldview needs to adapt a bit now.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, it's trying to kind of bring together, um, integrate really my spiritual life and my scholarly life. It continues to
And
work with my PhD and my creative life,
yeah.
with the album being a fruit, uh, having come unexpectedly to be through working on the book.
Well, I love it. I love how all these things are coming together, and I hate to throw cold water on a spiritual conversation by bringing it right back into the realm of materialism. But
Oh, I
when
like material.
when is Hum and Her Hummingbird Heart going to be available for the public, and where could they get their hands on it? Do you have a preferred place people look for them to discover these?
Yeah, thank you for that. Those are good questions. So I will release Hum by the usual means early next year.
Okay,
The mastered, all of the songs will be ready and mastered probably within a week.
sure, yeah,
And so if anyone wants to reach out to me by any means, the songs will be available for free to anyone who would like to hear them. So long as they'd like to sign up to the email list, which has information where people can uh, hear the first news about not just
sure,
this book, but the sequel, Integrate, Transform, Flourish: 10 Ways of Enriching the Stories We Tell Ourselves, and
yeah,
related e-courses and so on. The book, Her Hummingbird Heart, I was originally planning to have it come out this year, but that was before it led to me doing the songwriting challenge that Sarah does,
of
and
course,
then having the songs, and then deciding, oh, I can make them a record, thanks to Tyler from Space Cats and Nice Beaches reaching out and offering to record the songs. And we ended the record has one of my favorite drummers, Ben from Self Evident,
oh,
on
great drummer,
drums,
yeah,
and yeah, instrumentation includes cello, trumpet, so many different guitars. There's an organ, there's synths. Um, so with in answer to the question, we're finishing making the record that
yeah,
will be launched in the normal medium available wherever you stream music.
of course,
Probably January, February, but available if just reach out to me by any means in the meantime. And the book, I'm making revisions to, because now I have all of this stuff to add,
yes, yeah,
having committed to my own creativity through following in Sarah's footsteps. So that I will finish revising the book in light of those experiences this month, and I think I'll wait until the new year to self publish it. Amazon would be the best place to go if you just look for Simon Calder or Her Hummingbird Heart in January on Amazon, you'll find it. But again, signing up to the email list is the best way to follow all of my activities, because it's all self-published.
Well, sign up for Simon's email list if you are intrigued. I know I am, but I know you're also intrigued to see what are the last two picks on the Desert Island list. So here they come. We got some Roxy music and we got some LCD Sound System. But first, here's some new local music by Taylor James Donsky here on Desert Islands. Ooh, I looked at the clock and it was 11:11, and now we have 11 minutes left.
That's great. Yeah, the scholarly me, the me that wrote the PhD thesis, would think that paying attention to numbers randomly showing up was silly, but the present me does that all the time.
I would like to say I don't, but I do.
I would like to say I do.
Yeah.
I do.
I mean, and for folks tuning in, Simon's a real doctor. I just play one on TV.
And I've never really drawn attention to like having a
Right.
PhD, but the methodology in the book, and really to some extent for the Back to the City interviews, I realized in England when I just suddenly everything was paused, and I was reading these books on creativity and thinking, this is kind of like what I was exploring in my PhD. And then I read my PhD and I thought, oh, that methodology is kind of like what I apply in Back to the City. So then everything kind of came together, and I thought, this is the first time, I put some scholarship out on Spinoza. So you said about material, like bringing it down to matter. Spinoza, I'm a Spinoza scholar. Like my scholarship that I have put out whilst exploring Minneapolis music is all about Spinoza, the philosopher.
I did not realize that.
Yeah, George Eliot, who the PhD is. If Her Hummingbird Heart has Sarah Morris as a case study, my PhD has George Eliot, the 19th century novelist, as a case study.
Yeah.
Those two things are very similar. The PhD in this book, Sarah Morris and George Eliot. George Eliot translated Spinoza, Feuerbach, Strauss before becoming a novelist. She edited the Westminster Review, John Stuart Mill's journal. She was engaged to be married to Herbert Spencer, who the phrase "survival of the fittest" is not Darwin; it's Herbert Spencer. So she's like such an she's connected with all of these intellectuals, and Spinoza and Feuerbach are such interesting philosophers. Her British contemporaries didn't get them in the same way that she did, and she decided to write fiction informed by the sense of what it is to be human that she acquired from Spinoza, I think, in particular. And but my PhD was exploring what's going on when someone informed by those ideas decides to create art in the form of novels. And then it's the same kind of thing with Sarah Morris, reading Brené Brown, Julia Cameron, Elizabeth Gilbert. She introduced me to Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird in that Back to the City interview. She recommended another book on creativity, which wound up being the biggest influence on informing my writing process.
I had no idea that Spinoza was your focus, because for me, Spinoza was kind of at the heart of my own spiritual journey as well, and it always work that because like panpsychism is like, Spinoza is so hot right now and people don't even realize it, because even like the new atheist thinkers like Sam Harris are kind of like, I don't know if you're keeping up with his work, like it's got Spinoza all over.
Oh, interesting. I'm more interested in that. Also, this book is
which book is that?
This is Antonio Damasio, a neurobiologist. Joy, Sorrow, and the Feeling Brain is the subtitle to this book, but Looking for Spinoza is the title. He wrote Descartes' Error and the Feeling of, The Feeling of of what is, or I can't remember his most famous one. Bessel van der Kolk writes a lot about Antonio Damasio's work in The Body Keeps the Score.
I
The
still need to read
thesis,
that. I've heard amazing things about that.
oh, it's great. And I'm engaging with all of that kind of stuff in Integrate, Transform, Flourish, the book, and the e-courses, which are there's a website, integratetransformflourish.com, which will be the primary thing. Once all of this stuff is done, I'll continue making music, for each of the books as well. But Antonio Damasio, neurobiologist, thinks that Spinoza intuited what Antonio Damasio's neurobiological, lab research on feelings and emotions is now revealing. Spinoza's ethics is, on the one hand, it's got metaphysics, the sense of God being everything, God being nature. On the other hand, it's mostly about the affects and just understanding what our emotions are and what it is to navigate life as the type of being that we are.
Yes.
That's
kind of the Sam Harris tie-in before I get corrected by a bunch of people on the internet, because he's starting to go back into like, well, wait a minute, there is some sort of evidence that there's a possibility that consciousness is not actually local, and that might mean that I would wait. I'm not quite convinced that the universe itself isn't conscious, and he's kind of going down that journey now. He's not really like endorsing spirituality, but like the breadcrumbs that are kind of leading him in this direction are just like, oh, so you mean Spinoza?
Spinoza's God, which was Einstein's God too.
Yes, exactly. Yes. This is like it's not a new idea, but I think it does get it keeps coming up. Because I kind of cycled through a lot of intellectual thought in my 20s, when I was young and knew everything, and kind of going, through a journey of everything from existentialism to nihilism to determinism, and then it always comes back to Spinoza in a weird way. Even getting into like people like Mitch Horowitz and like Jason Louv, and dabbling in Crowley, like all that stuff ties to this kind of thinking.
And even for materialism, for Marx, in Althusser's for Marx, when Marx becomes a dialectical materialist, it is Althusser says there's a precedent for Marx's epistemology there with this in Spinoza.
Yeah,
Marx was influenced by Spinoza. Anyone who's really immersed themselves in Spinoza's ethics, Deleuze, talks about the broomstick journey. It's like you could read the ethics, like it's deductions, it's very logical, but which is important. But then also the ride we could talk. There's a lot we could say about Spinoza, but not in like 2 minutes.
Well, it's kind of hard to. But I guess I had never thought about connecting the process of creativity with this, because I definitely explored my own meditation practice but as far as marrying the two of a spiritual practice and a creative practice, it makes so much sense that it would kind of go hand in hand, because like at the core of Spinoza, like to like if you had to give cliff notes, it's just like, it's in everything, because it is everything all the time.
I took
Like,
the artist way off my bookshelf,
I gotta,
and
I really, yeah, I would love to hear more of this. I gotta check out The Artist's Way because you're like the third person that like swears by it.
right,
And
was that Sarah Morris was the first person that swore to it, in my experience, and that was back
yeah,
in my 2016 early Back to the City interview with her, and I'd forgotten
yeah,
that she was doing that. So it was
wow.
nice. Then it resurfaced in that 2020 Back
Yeah,
to the
it's
City
like
interview.
here's a sign.
Yep. So and then I just grabbed it from the bookshelf and I
Yeah.
opened it to the page that had the thing that I wanted to show you, which is that's strange.
Oh,
But
it's not
nothing that
strange at
happens.
all.
It is strange, but it is also to be expected. Week one, recovering a sense of safety. Like there are these different obstacles, and there are 12 weeks. Um, and it has a quote from Spinoza. That's what I wanted to show you, and
Sure.
that's the page I randomly opened it to. Do not weep, do not wax indignant. Understand. Spinoza is all about understanding, and understanding our
Yes.
emotions.
Yeah.
But he also doesn't believe that there is like a faculty of free will, and his epistemology it doesn't. There isn't this Cartesian mind, but he's an early critic of Cartesian mind-body dualism. So
Yeah.
understanding you can only a more powerful affect can change a less powerful affect. So if I'm really fearful or angry, like just intellectually understanding isn't going to make a big difference. So, but so much of the artist way it does have to do with um, with understanding our emotions.
Yeah.
There's a bunch about fear. There's a bunch in this and Big Magic. There's a bunch about anger. There's a bunch about jealousy. It's very, very Spinozan because Spinoza
Yeah.
is a philosopher who wants to offer a therapy, basically, to who wants
Yeah.
to help humans live the human life well.
Yeah. And I've been also getting back into my journey into Stoicism,
Mm,
just because I feel like Marcus Aurelius's Meditations is an amazing book for seeking to understand feelings and processing them. Uh,
it
and
is.
it's kind of weird. Like when I've been kind of that's been my balance of like a little bit of woo and then the rock is back to the stoic, but which I feel like stoicism nowadays I think people equate with emotionless
Mm,
when I think it's quite the opposite. It's almost like encouraging you to dive right in and
yeah.
feel the feelings and observe those feelings, much like a meditation practice of just observing the thoughts. It's like don't try to control the thoughts, merely observe them. You know, like treat them like traffic. You know, it's just like thoughts are like buses. You can get on. You can get on the bus, or you can just kind of watch it go. I'm just like,
Yeah.
oh yes, the negative train came a little early today.
The popular book at the moment, Emotional Agility by Susan David, is there's lots of overlap with the Stoics in that respect. Because
Yeah.
it's like you can bottle up your emotions, or you can
Yes.
be like driven by the emotions. And
Yes.
there's a third option, which is to treat the emotions as kind of beacons. Say, my
Yes.
anger is giving me important information, and all of the
Yes.
emotions can serve me, and so that is definitely core to my philosophy and all of these books. I
Yeah.
recommend to you, if you're interested in Stoicism, the philosopher Martha Nussbaum really influenced my scholarship with my PhD and so on. And this is her book on Stoicism, the Roman Stoics. It's called The Therapy of Desire, and she's emphasizing how the Stoics also, and there's definitely a link between they influenced Spinoza.
Yeah. Oh, of
Was
course. Of
massively
course.
influenced by these
Oh,
Roman
of
Stoics.
course. Yeah.
But the therapy of desire, like they are philosophers who are trying to offer, like I said, Spinoza is humans advice, guidance on how to navigate being a human
Yeah.
and having a good relationship with one's emotions and
I
accepting their
I okay,
guidance.
Therapy of Desire and The Artist's Way, I definitely have to check out. What I enjoy about talking with you, Simon, is I always feel like I can take something out of it, and there's always like a place for more to grow into. And I love
To be
that this
continued.
conversation
We
was
need to
no.
talk about Spinoza more.
Oh yeah, I would love to. Unfortunately,
Oh,
Democracy
but
Now! Is on, and the next DJ is at the door, so I gotta make sure here. So unfortunately I gotta cut this short. I don't want to, but I think that it's an excellent reason to just say to be continued.
to be continued.
It was great to see you. I hope you have a
Likewise.
good day, and congrats on the new books, parenthetical S. As well as the new record. And yeah, lovely chat. Let's continue this later. And I hope to see you in person sooner than later.
Let's plan on it.
That's excellent. Have a good day, Simon. Thank you so much for